They said fame is a mirror that only reflects what you bring to it. But for him, before the headlines, before the late-night hosts, before the documentaries with slow violins and freeze frames, fame felt more like a window he was shoved through. He never set out to be anyone's obsession. He came from a town skirted by a reluctant river and a chipped two-lane bridge. A place where the grocery clerk knew the brand of cereal you bought by the sound of the box on the counter. A place where apologies traveled in teacups and grief was folded carefully into dish towels so it could dry without making a scene. In his house, doors didn't slam, they sighed. Long before the word killer was draped over his shoulders, he learned that silence had an architecture. Narrow corridors with light that never quite reached the floor.
Please,
his
not
mother
now.
spoke in warnings, sentences with breaks built in. Don't look too long, don't ask too much,
I said I'll
don't
take
need
care
more
of
than
it.
you can carry home. His father
that
was a
clear?
catalog of closed drawers. Approval arrived as a tap on the shoulder or a grunt that could be mistaken for indigestion. Love was something you deduced from the way your shoes were lined up in the evening. He grew skillful at smallness. Polite grades, polite laughter, polite invisibility. Teachers praised him for neat margins. Classmates forgot to invite him to suffer. You're easy, someone once told him, meaning uncomplicated, and he wore the word like a split seam hidden under a jacket.
Is anyone there? You're...
To be easy was to be portable, not heavy enough to bend anyone's day. He thought of himself as a hallway, a place people pass through to reach something worth entering, a place that exists to connect rooms that matter. If he had dreams, he kept them modest, flat-pack fantasies you could assemble without instructions. A job where no one shouted, a chair that didn't wobble, a name that didn't have to be repeated twice at the counter. On Sundays, he stood at the river and watched foam snag on a stone shaped like a shoulder blade. He learned the patience of water, the discipline of pretending movement is choice. He believed, as boys are encouraged to believe, that goodness is obedience plus grace under discomfort. But he also learned a grimmer equation, one that nobody puts on a poster. That attention is a currency kept in safe deposit boxes, released only to those who demand interest. Even then, in that mildewed town, he could feel the first hunger gather like weather. He wanted a witness, not applause. He wanted someone to say, "I see you," and feel the sentence cling to him like damp cotton. Loneliness arrived not as emptiness but as a surfeit of unspent words. He began to save them, rolling syllables into little pills of thought he could swallow later. If a child can learn to read the temperature of a room by the angle of a shoulder, he learned to read the seasons by the distance between his parents' mouths. He did not hate them. Hate would have given him something to do. Instead, he curated neutrality, a museum of safe gestures. But in the corners of his chest, a rumor started. What if being noticed could fix the shape of you? What if recognition could pin you to a meaning the way a label pins a butterfly to a common name? He didn't yet know how such pinning feels. Only that he was tired of drifting like a fog that people drove through without turning on their lights. The first time he learned how easily the world can be rearranged wasn't in blood, not even close. It happened at 14, after an argument that couldn't justify its own volume. He closed a door too sharply, and a cheap frame fell, glass shattering into disciplined glitter across the hallway carpet. The portrait inside, an ant on a porch swing, frozen mid-laugh, sheared into clean pieces, her mouth and eyes liberated from the architecture of her face. He stood there, knee-deep in glinting consequence, astonished that a single thoughtless hinge of motion could edit reality. It felt like discovering a trapdoor under his own feet. Not an invitation exactly, but a fact waiting to be used by anyone unafraid of basements. He swept it up, cut a fingertip, watched a red punctuation bloom and vanish under a paper towel, and thought, rooms are systems, and systems can be changed. Years later, when the city swallowed him, he recognized the same geometry in steel and steam. Subway cars hummed with people perfecting the art of not being there. Eyes tunneling into screens, earbuds corking the ocean of other people's weather. He admired how the city performed indifference at scale, and then he imitated it. He built rituals to keep from unraveling. He walked 7th to 10th at dusk, counted blue doors, read the same page of a thrifted paperback in 3 different laundromats. He kept a ledger in a marbled notebook, a tidy archive of tiny grievances that didn't qualify as crimes. A shoulder that didn't apologize for its collision, a cashier who said, "Next," without looking up, a friend of a friend who told a story in which he was a placeholder. None of it mattered, and yet it accumulated. Sediment at the bottom of a glass the bartender forgot to rinse. He told himself he was just collecting evidence for a case he'd never have to try. Then there was her. At first she was only a recurring detail in the city's long paragraph. A face that passed through his periphery bearing the practical beauty of someone who knows where she's going. the grocery bag half a smile across her forearm, the key between knuckles like a city girl rosary, the laugh that struck like a match, quick, real, gone before smoke learned its name. He discovered her rhythms the way you learn a new language by overhearing it. The Tuesdays at the pharmacy, the Thursdays she wore rain even when the sky was blank, the Saturdays that stretched long and slow across a market where the tomatoes gleamed like varnished hearts. He told himself it was a coincidence to keep arriving where she arrived, a kindness to keep his distance, a joke he told his conscience that never quite landed. Loneliness, he realized, isn't the absence of people but the absence of witnesses, and he was greedy for a witness with eyes the color of a beginning. He did not want to possess her. That verb was a stranger to his mouth. He wanted to be illuminated by her attention the way a moth briefly becomes a symbol when it stutters through a beam of light. He wrote in the ledger, "A life is a room you exit to know it was a room." Later, other hands would hold that sentence like a smoking gun, asking whether words are rehearsal or substitute. He didn't know. He only knew he felt more real when his day intersected with hers, even if the intersection was measured in sidewalk squares and the polite exchange of avoiding collision. People will say he stalked her. People love verbs that turn discomfort into clarity. In truth, he orbited. He called it staying ready for coincidence. He practiced not speaking to her with a devotion that looked like piety from across the street. Somewhere under the neat columns of his days, a tremor formed. He could feel it when he lay down at night, a small knocking at the hinge of an unchosen door. The night it happened refused to make a spectacle of itself. No thunder rehearsed its excuses. No moon staged its alibi. It began with the ordinary choreography the city invents for anyone willing to pretend they're not dancing. Footsteps syncing with crosswalks, the supermarket's breath warm and onion sweet against the sidewalk, a bus shrugging to a stop like a tired animal. He had worked late at a job that taught him how to be helpful without leaving fingerprints. He washed his hands in a sink that coughed, watched water scrawl temporary calligraphy across the steel, and left before the last email could remember his name. He told himself he was walking home by this route because it was shorter. He told himself a lot of things. When he saw her, her face lit by the fluorescent concession of a corner store, he felt the old hallway inside him narrow to a keyhole. She stepped out with a grocery bag shaped like a soft argument against hunger, keys bright between her knuckles the way all the girls in the city are taught, and he thought of the picture frame from years ago, how easily a single motion can rearrange a world that was doing fine. He didn't plan a script. Even now he will insist there was no plan, just a pressure building behind a door he had refused to name. He followed at a distance polite enough to pass for coincidence, then less polite, then intimate enough for the night to notice. The stairwell smelled like metal and onion skin and the slow decay of old paint. Echoes behave badly in stairwells. They take sides. He reached out, not fast, not slow, a gesture built from equal parts request and command, and said something that tries even now to reconstruct itself from fragments. Wait, maybe. Please, perhaps. Undoubtedly. She turned with the practiced fear of someone who refuses to be a story, and found a man who had finally decided he could no longer survive as negative space. What followed cannot be cleanly told, not because mystery is fashionable but because the truth was noisy and the memory is stubborn. Hands misread each other, urgency borrowed the mask of intent, and the world tilted on a hinge the way a trapdoor does when you've stepped too far onto its lie. Later, experts would measure angles and blood, would talk about force and sequence as if the heart obeys physics when it panics. Later, he would try to explain that he wanted to be seen so completely that the seeing would change him, that he wanted a witness the way a drowning man wants air. Not ownership, not romance, not even rescue, just proof that he was not a rumor wearing shoes. In the stairwell, proof arrived the cruel way proof often does, through ruin. The bag broke. Something hard hit concrete. A syllable cut itself on the edge of a breath. The old silence from his childhood house, polite, soft, lethal, returned with its new edge and divided the room into before and after. When it was over, the air felt thinner. The world rearranged to fit an outline he had not intended to draw but had traced with terrible accuracy. He stood there, trying to hear any sound that would argue the moment back into the body of ordinary time. None came. Sirens are slow until they are not. He didn't run. Whether that was courage or exhaustion, he cannot say. He only knows that a door he had refused to name had opened, and the night at last had given him a witness. It was the wrong witness, wearing the wrong kind of certainty. It would make him famous. Morning arrived like an accusation wrapped in gold. The light didn't care what it illuminated, it simply entered the room, climbed over the crime scene tape, brushed its fingers across the cold metal railing, and rested on him as if it had found an object worth clarifying. He was sitting on the curb when they found him, the grocery bag a collapsed lung beside his shoes. He wasn't crying. He wasn't speaking. He was listening, to the ambulance, to the faraway bark of a dog that didn't know it was interrupting history, to the whisper of his own pulse as it tried to count time backwards. When the officers approached, he didn't resist. Resistance requires belief in a version of yourself worth defending, and he had misplaced that belief somewhere in the stairwell. They said he looked calm, and maybe he was. Calm the way water is calm before the dive. Calm because there's nothing left to tremble for. Inside the police car, as the city slid past in tilted fragments, he saw his reflection in the window. It startled him, not because of guilt but because of how familiar he looked. It was the same face that had been invisible yesterday, the same tired outline, only now it glowed faintly with recognition. The city had finally noticed him. Sirens sang a song of consequence, and for the first time, he was part of the melody. He spent the first night in a holding cell that smelled of metal and other people's decisions. Sleep came like a thief, stealing hours without permission. He dreamed not of her face but of the river from his childhood. The way water keeps moving even when it carries the shape of something broken. In the dream, the river spoke in headlines. It said, "You are known now. You are seen." He woke with a start and almost smiled, because wasn't that what he'd wanted? To be known? But recognition, he realized, is a kind of surgery. It opens you up and leaves you on the table while everyone else decides which parts are worth saving. The next morning, reporters swarmed outside the courthouse like hungry birds waiting for crumbs of confession. Cameras blinked like eyes too impatient for blinking. The words psychopath, loner, monster, and artist of death floated through the air, each one trying to tattoo itself on his story. His lawyer told him not to speak. "The less you say, the better," she warned. But silence had been his first language, and now it was being used against him. The world filled in the blanks with whatever made the best copy. They dug up old notebooks, interviews with neighbors, grainy photos of him feeding stray cats. Someone found a sentence he'd written in high school. A person is made of what others refuse to see, and turned it into prophecy. He was now a narrative. A cautionary tale. A myth with dental records. He thought of the trapdoor again, how it had waited patiently beneath his life, how stepping through it had felt like falling and flying at once. And yet, amid the noise, there was a strange kind of peace. 4 years, he had walked unseen. Now every stranger could describe him. 4 years, he had written words that vanished into drawers. Now each syllable was dissected under lights. Even as he was condemned, he was immortalized. Fame and infamy, he discovered, are siblings who share the same shadow. He wasn't sure which one had claimed him, only that the shadow fit perfectly. When he closed his eyes, he saw her face, not as she had looked in those final moments, but as she had looked the first time he noticed her, half turned toward the light, unaware that she was already the center of his universe. He wanted to tell her he was sorry. He wanted to tell her that being seen isn't the same as being understood. But words had stopped listening. They had moved on without him, busy writing the next chapter of the story the world preferred. He didn't fight the handcuffs as they clicked shut. They felt almost ceremonial, like the closing of parentheses around a life that had run too long without punctuation. He walked through the crowd of flashing bulbs and questions, head bowed but eyes open, and for a moment he thought of his mother's voice. Soft, exhausted, forever saying don't look too long. He understood now what she'd meant. Seeing is dangerous. Being seen can kill. But he also understood that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and that somewhere, deep down, some small broken part of him was grateful. Because even if the world hated him, at least it knew